Welcome to the Old Mac Gang podcast, or OMG if you prefer. It's a podcast with a panel of longtime Mac Apple users who want to discuss the most relevant apps and services for age-seasoned users. I'm Marty, an Apple enthusiast and podcaster. I'm a 67-year-old age-seasoned user who has collected a great group of friends to talk about Apple and the seasoned citizens who use it. Let's see who we have on our panel today.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm an age-seasoned 72-year-old two-time retiree. I was a foundryman and following that a high school math teacher, and I began my journey with Apple products in 2006, and I enjoy using a very large assortment of Apple devices and services each and every day.
Good evening and hello. My name is Bob Wood from Tucson, and I am also a seasoned Mac user of a certain age and a Mac user group leader for a long time now, and I'm happy to be here.
My name is Gary Shark. I live in Cleveland, and in 2000, I retired and moved back to Cleveland, where I found two Mac user groups. It has brought me to today.
Hello, I'm Chris Wesselman. I'm 77, and I got my first Mac, a 128K Mac, in November 1984. I spent 9 years as a member of the Apple Corps of Dallas and later the Mac Pack in Richardson, Texas, as well as absorbing everything I could. I was then able to work for Apple for 8.5 years in Austin, Campbell, and Cupertino, and later finished my career doing tech support at a major university in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been retired for the last 8 years in Tucson, Arizona, and have been a happy member of the Tucson Mac User Group since meeting Bob Wood, its president, on jury duty a few years back, but that's another story. I'm currently using an M1 Mac Mini and an iPhone 16 Pro Max, and occasionally a 9th generation iPad. Happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have everybody here. This episode, we're going to start to look at some apps that we all have as Mac users. So this will be the first of probably a series of episodes that we go through some of the basic Mac apps and maybe talk about some other alternative apps where it's appropriate that you might want to consider. But we're going to get down to sort of the nitty-gritty of what these apps can do and how we use them and ways in which we use them. Let's start with Bob, if we can, who made some suggestions about doing this. So, Bob, what kind of ways how do you use reminders?
Firstly, I want to say that I've only been using reminders for the part of 2024. So it's really pretty new to me, and I'm kind of excited to find some of its features and secrets, but I'm sure there's more that I haven't seen. I use lists in reminders for several things. For example, I have one called Household and one for my user group and one for some of my clients and one for the little rental property that we own. I really like the repeating features of reminders, so they come up automatically, and I have some that are daily. For example, prescriptions. Pretty much everybody who reaches this advanced age has mini prescriptions, and I have some throughout the day, and I have used reminders to help me remember. Most of the time, I've already taken them before reminders gives me a notification. I also have weekly and monthly and annual reminders and multiple months, such as changing the filter in the furnace, things like that. I can't find how to do what I call complex repeats, such as the third Tuesday of the month, or more complex than that would be 5 days before the third Tuesday of the month, which is one of the things I have to keep track of elsewhere. I have not started using subtasks yet. I've read a little bit about it, but I haven't really come up with a need for that. They say you can use it to have a grocery list or a packing list for a vacation. I generally use notes for something like that. I really like the fact that it syncs to all my Apple devices. I can find my reminders on my Mac, my phone, my iPad, my portable Mac. Just today, I found out about the fact that when you have the updated OS, you can now show reminders in Calendar. When I looked at that M1 MacBook that does have the current Mac OS 15, God, it was reminders everywhere. that's not really what I want to use calendars for. I think that I have different missions for reminders than calendars. So I had to look it up and figure out how to turn them off of calendars so I could see the other stuff that I wanted to do. So I was able to turn off show reminders in calendar and keep separate things to do. And to-dos are something I'm old school enough that I use a piece of paper. The reason I do piece of paper is every morning with my cup of coffee, I sit down and I rewrite my to-dos on a piece of paper. This allows me or this forces me to think about each of the items and look at it throughout the day and cross them off after I've done something. So today I had five things on to do, and I've got 2 of them crossed off. That's not a total loss. I find that there's much more to learn and to find with reminders, and perhaps I'll find out more things a little later tonight. So now I'm going to turn it over.
Well, I don't use reminders. However, when Marty sent out the show notes, and he's got a lot of links about reminders, which I'm sure he'll talk about later, I went back and looked, and I do have reminders. I have used them in the past, and now I'm looking forward to learning more about them. A few years ago, I thought it was Peter, but when I checked with him earlier in the week, any list is what I've been using or used a little bit, sort of to take the place of reminders. However, now that we're starting to talk about them, I'm anxious to learn a little more about them and use them, along with calendar. And I, like you, Bob, not that I have that many on my list each day, on my to-do list to cross them out. But I'm looking forward to learning more about reminders now that we have it before us.
Yeah, I do and I don't use reminders. And let me clarify what that is after I say what a reminder is to me. Because, like Bob, I consider them, very close to a to do, very close to a calendar item. So for me, a reminder is something that I need to do at a specific time in my life, but is not worthy of going onto the calendar. Okay. Not a to do list that I'm going to work down, but something needs to happen at a certain time. Now, when I said I do and don't use reminders, I started using them when reminders was not as good as it is today. And so I use a couple of little front end applets that leverage on the reminders database so that everything is available everywhere the way Bob said he likes it. So when I got the show notes and started looking at reminders, I said, whoa, reminders does all these things I didn't think it did and aren't implemented in my capture system. I should take a closer look at doing more with them. But right now, when I look at my completed reminders, I see, that I do an average of 10 reminders a day. And what did I see? 3 are daily recurring, 1 or 2 are weekly recurring. I have monthly and other recurring ones like that as well, a day of the month recurring ones. But essentially what happens is that I either react and do them when they pop up, or I push them ahead a little in time. About half of them get done right when the reminder comes up, and about half of them get pushed. I couldn't find any that I only pushed once. That was funny when I looked. I found they got pushed either 2 or 3 times if they weren't done right away, and then I did them. So that's how I use them. And I think I'm eager to get into reminders that trigger when I arrive somewhere or when I leave somewhere. And I'm also, just as I was reading, I'm eager to think about some of the hooks into shortcuts where I could trigger the creation of reminders through shortcuts, not necessarily through my other apps or through directly interacting with the reminder. But I do think it's improved fantastically since I last looked at it. I think Chris is next.
I am, and I'm getting an unstable internet message here, so I hope things go smoothly. Like everybody else here, I was surprised to read some of the new capabilities of reminders, an app I've been using from day one in a very simplified fashion, and Marty's excellent material that I hope we can put in the show notes. I was looking subtasks and, when the next time I message a particular person, remember to mention something like this. There are a whole bunch more things that reminders will do. And being a very visual Mac person, I tended to use calendar items more because I wanted to make sure I saw it somewhere during the day. And I don't typically look at the reminders app. So I had the very happy task today of changing a bunch of these daily or weekly items into reminders now that they'll appear on my calendar under macOS Sequoia, which, or iOS 18, which I'm finding really helpful. But then again, I don't have nearly as many reminders as Bob, so that may be an interesting bridge to cross down the road if I do have a lot of reminders. But it's one of these unsung heroes that Apple's been putting more and more features into and making better and better. And all of a sudden, oh my gosh, it'll do that, and it'll do that, and it'll do that. So that's been my experience, Marty.
I started out with to-do lists. I'm real interested in that process, trying to organize my workflow. And I did really complicated, like Omni Plan has a really complicated and expensive to-do list with project management. And I found I never used it. And so then I said, well, I'm going to use Things, which is another to-do list that is a good app. It's great. It's not necessarily universal cross-platform into Android. It's an Apple-based app, and I was messing around with Android for a while, so I started using Todoist. And actually, I have accounts for both of those now, and I still use them, or I still think about using them. But I still wasn't getting any better. My work wasn't getting done any better. And so I decided I need something that I can just say, hey, I need to do this and have it automatically put down. So the beauty of reminders for me is the integration with the S Lady. So I can do a verbal. Mine has an Australian accent, so I might as well just call her Sheila, and that won't trigger a lot of devices when I say it. But I could say, "Hey Sheila, remind me about the dentist appointment tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m." Or put in my reminders, and she'll create that as a reminder. If I want to then move that into a task, or if I have a project like I need to start to establish a collection of steps that go into completing a project, I can do those sub projects or the sub parts that Bob alluded to. I can do that with the app. And so I will use the audio version of Sheila to be able to just get it in the app. Then when it's in the app and I'm in front of a desktop, or if I've got my iPhone, I can move those around into the categories that I want them to be in. I can put subtasks into them. But if it doesn't get out of my head and get somewhere quick, it's going to be forgotten. And I'll go through phases where I'll load up maybe 8 ideas just start coming out of my head, and I'll just go add this to reminders, add this to reminders, and it'll all be there for me to look at. The trouble again is still having to look at it. I'm going back to Bob's idea of just having a pad of paper and a list that you can work off of. Bob Levitas, who some of us might know, what was he, Dr. Mac, or I forget what his nickname was.
Macintosh.
Dr. Macintosh. He had like a beginner's training that you could use all the different things. And one of the support documents he had was a simple to-do list. And I ran off a bunch of copies of that blank list and put it on my desk. And when I said every morning, I did just what Bob did. And I got more accomplished by doing that than I do sometimes with the technology, because I'll forget about the technology and that it's there for me to use. Now, I can put reminders in to reminders. I mean, I can put in things that will remind me that the task is coming up. I happen to like its integration with the calendar because I'm looking at the calendar and then there's a list of stuff at the top of it that I've got to try and fit into the calendar or the process. So I've kind of rolled it back and am working with reminders as a really kind of functional to-do list for me with that I can then customize if I need to customize it into different task areas to get my work done with. And for me, the best part is that I can just trigger it. And you can do some of that with other apps like Todoist and things, but you have to tell Sheila and you have to use a particular set of language to make sure that it's getting directed to the app and it doesn't turn out to be something that winds up in your reminders app that you really wanted in your things app. So I like the integration with Siri for that purpose. So I guess, are there any functions that can be done through the reminders app that you're looking at or that you've done before?
Well, for me, I think that setting up a reminder with Siri, with the S lady, is something I've never done. And like I say, I'm pretty new to reminders. So I'm going to try some of these things and see if they fit in my head and in my workflow. You mentioned Bob Levitas, and I have a quick little story. My first MacBook, after buying my Macintosh Classic, was, and from there, I found out that there is such a thing as a Mac user group. Then I went back to the retailer and asked them about it, and they told me about the one that was in Milwaukee, the town that I lived in. And through that, I became an officer of the club, was giving a demonstration, and there was this cute girl who was never been in our group before, never been at a meeting, and somehow in my demonstration of ClarisWorks mentioned the fact that I was single, and now I'm married to her, and have been married to her for 20 years. So at least a bit of that I have to thank Bob Levitas for.
It
Okay,
wasn't
well,
ClarisWorks.
Yeah, or ClarisWorks, or you can say you're single anyways. I mean, you get in more trouble if you're not. But you can use the single line any way you can fit it in, I guess. Gary, you're new to this. So you're probably gonna take what we have in the show and some of the links and just play around with it. I like the fact that Bob is saying, well, I'll try Sheila and see if Sheila can be functional for me.
Right. I think your explanation, Marty, made it easy enough for us to make that. And I like the idea of using Sheila. Now, I'm finding the more that I'm starting, as I shared earlier meetings about using dictation, and it's working quite well for me. Very little editing. So I'm looking forward to trying reminders and knowing that help is out there.
Yeah, well, one last comment on that, then I kind of want to go to Peter if he's got some ideas. But most of the time, I'm reminded of things I have to do that I've forgotten about when I'm in the car, and I can't, text message while I'm sitting in the car, but I can use CarPlay and I can ask Sheila to put this in my reminders, and and I don't know if I'm driving and thinking and I'm paying attention to the road, or things come to me then, and it's the best place for me to use Sheila to direct it to put in something into reminders.
Mhm.
Well, my Sheila has a male British voice, and I refer to him as Rupert. But I have asked Rupert to place reminders for me on specific dates at specific times, many hundreds of times. And he has done it accurately every time. So it does automate well or capture well that way. The feature which I mentioned earlier that I'm intrigued at looking at is location-based reminders, because any location can be that location. And the thing which I haven't explored, which I just saw, and I think about Bob's first comment about visibility, seeing a calendar littered with reminders, is I see that there's a morning, afternoon, and tonight section when you create a reminder in the app. And if you only have those visible at those times of day, that's something that's appealing to me. The one thing I wanted to comment on with regard to to-do lists is, since these things overlap, to me, reminders are something I never have a desire to share with anyone else. They're reminders for me. I need to do something. whereas both to-do lists and calendar items are things that I evaluate carefully about how do I share these with others so that they don't expect me to do something at a time when they should know I'm not going to do it, or if we're working on a task together somehow, that we can knock off portions of it independently without connecting with each other. And those are things I want to think about carefully before I start using something as a to-do list. Oh, and I use things as a unstructured to-do list that has, sort of different categories of to-dos, which when we get to that topic, we can talk about. And Chris.
So far, and until today, when I started reading about all these new wonderful capabilities, I've done almost all of mine through the S Lady, who, by the way, quick aside, apparently in the developer community, a lot of people call her Iris, which is who spelled backwards.
Oh, nice.
And I don't know how well that works multilingually, but that might be a concern too, if you're in a multilingual community. But I've almost exclusively used that. And the one thing I really would like to see, I thought about this in the middle of the night last night, was I track my sleep, so I've got my watch on. I'd like to be able to set a reminder from my watch to the phone in another room while both are in sleep mode. And right now we can't do that. And matter of fact, we can't do much of anything in sleep mode, actually, because we're supposed to be asleep. But it would be nice to be able to do that. And I, all the time on CarPlay, I'm setting reminders or sending text messages, but don't tell anybody. I just ask Iris to send a text message, and she's pretty good at it as long as she knows who it is. I think she's finally figured out who my wife is after all these years. But I think it can be really handy, and I love the location idea. Or the next time I message so-and-so, the next time I send a text to Bob Wood, remind me to ask him about X, Y, or Z or something. And that could be really useful. And that whole geofencing concept with either with people or places is a really big value add in recent years.
Yeah, I really don't have much to add to what's already been said in terms of functions that can be done through the Reminders app. Are there any other things that people want to mention before we kind of go to and show a few of the sites?
I have a quick comment. Tonight has shown me once again that with Apple apps that go across the entire ecosystem, it's wonderful that we have 5 people here. They all use reminders or don't use reminders in different ways to fit their needs and their workflows. And I think that's the great thing. I haven't used the S Lady to create any reminders. I haven't needed it. But now that I think about it, maybe there will be things that I will want to do that way. And so it's just the fact that the software is so deep and yet simple that everybody can use it in their own way.
Well, yeah, I mean, Apple has done a good job of kind of looking at what other to-do reminder sorts of functions are. And actually, reminders were reminders. And I think they're now building in more task management kinds of things. So Apple is kind of creeped up to where I can when I creep down, I can kind of meet them where they're at, and they do the functions that I need to do without getting too sophisticated. But they've taken some of the best from some of the more complicated systems to put it into reminders. I wouldn't have used reminders 2 years ago. I've just started using it as my expectations and my processes creep down. And Apple has also creeped up to be able to do some pretty cool things with it. Peter, just one comment. You call yours Rupert?
I don't call, that's what we refer to him as so we don't trigger him. We use the S name that everybody else uses.
Oh, okay. All right. When I think of Rupert, I think of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and Steve Martin. So always keep the cork on the fork, Rupert, from that movie. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the resources. All of these will be within the show notes, and you can see some the Apple support, and Bob has talked about Apple support pages as being great in terms of it's kind of, and Apple support communities are kind of not shown and not seen as much, but through some search, you can find some great things that reminders. You can use reminders on your iPhone, iPad, or iPod Touch. It always includes information on the latest release, which is 18.2. Then we have another site here we'll share with you from Gear Patrol, where it gives you examples of how to use reminders and how to make lists, how to do things like that and create smart lists with reminders. So that's I think a good resource for folks to take a look at. And then 9 to 5 Mac did a nice article on here's everything new in reminders for iOS 18. And what they have in that article is information that talks about integrating with a calendar app. Bob has mentioned that, subtasks, customizing to-do lists, and also enhanced shortcuts for integration. So you can do some cool things with that. Then Dan Wasink does a wonderful link where he talks about calendars and reminders and explains what you can do with reminders in calendars and how to recover deleted reminders. So a nice little link there. And then since it was just brought up, and I remember that was kind of talk when they said, you can make grocery lists with reminders now, potentially replacing an app that Gary talked about and that I still use for grocery lists called AnyList. But this is the direction, at least on your iPhone, how to go ahead and create grocery lists simply through reminders. So those are some ideas and some links. They'll be in the show notes. So whether you're watching it in the video or you're watching it on the podcast, you'll be able to retrieve those links to take a look at them. Anything else?
Marty, I appreciate your including Dan Wasick's link. I had followed some of his tutorials, multiple years back, and I hadn't seen any recently and sort of forgot. But I'm definitely going to earmark the site. I thought he did a very good summary of the whole thing. I'm a see the movie instead of read the book guy, and so that's perfect for me. And I noticed he's got some other things like what's new in notes. And, in addition to Apple user groups, these kinds of things are tremendously helpful to find out all the new functionality that Apple really hasn't been pushing and sharing how these things have improved. I guess it's just too much out there now, but, it's helpful stuff and worth a look-see maybe once a week.
Yeah.
We used to do that at Apple. Friday mornings, we could update our systems and just look at stuff. And, and so everybody would do that in Apple support, back then, back in the day. And it helped a lot.
Well, Dan Wasink, Dan's tutorials, if you want to look at it, you can join that tutorial and you get access to all of his stuff. He does Ask Me Anything Live. He does some training occasionally that's open to members of his group. And so he's a good resource. And, I'm one of those folks that it's not breaking my bank, but it sure is worth supporting people who are doing that kind of work for the Apple community and for Apple users. And Dan's a really good guy about that. So, well, let's wrap it up for this episode. Our next live episode will be on Wednesday, January 15th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time through YouTube, where you can watch this crew at youtube.com/@oldmacgang, all one word, the @ Old Mac Gang. You can always pick up the podcast or video later if you missed the live show. Please share this with your friends in Mac user groups so they have another resource through our podcast. Our music bed is by Philip Gross, Marrakesh, courtesy of the Free Music Archive. More information about this podcast and others can be found at thepodtalk.net. The break that we had, I worked on getting the page up to date, and so you can find all the information about it. Thanks to the group, Gary, Chris, Peter, and Bob. Everybody say bye, and thank you for being part of the Old Mac Gang. We'll see you next time.